Normally, people prefer the over-the-top V-shaped sound that emphasizes bass and treble. However, audiophiles prefer a balanced sound signature, which is why the Chu II was highly anticipated by most audiophiles. Despite a lot of audiophiles lamenting the move to the dreaded V-shaped sound, it still mostly retains a balanced sound feel. But is it only because of the USB version that might have its own equalizer settings? Or does the sound of the specific Chu II that I have a golden sample? Before I get into how the Chu II sounds in detail, not just in music but also gaming, what do you get with the Chu IIs? There is of course the USB-C cable inside the pleather carry case, which isn't that bad, but I always find these cases pretty useless given I tend to pocket the IAMs and I don't like the extra step of opening a case. Which makes it great that the cable is easily replaceable. It is a 2-pin, and like I've said, I've got the USB version cable with a mic, which we will test later in the video, and I have to say that the cable is still great even after a month of abuse. Very flexible, without noticeable microphonics or handling noise, while the ear-shaped section of the cable is thick and soft enough that it doesn't hurt pulling into my ear, bringing me into the build of the Chu II itself. Holding on just fine in my ears, but I did find for my particular ears, it does become noticeably loose at over an hour of use. The Chu IIs themselves seem solid given that they are made out of metal despite the seams not matching up exactly. The real problem is that the holes can get clogged if you have wet earwax, as I found out after a bath when I didn't wait until I was fully dry before starting to use the Chu II again. But because of that, I also found that you can take out the lip of the ear tip to clean them in hot or warm water. Just be careful not to drop them into the sink. Now, how do they sound assuming that they aren't clogged? There seems to be a noticeable difference between using the provided USB-C connection and the regular 3.5 aux cable. I'll start by saying that overall, the Chu II is a slightly V-shaped sound, meaning that the mids and vocals feel like they're a little behind the bass and other instruments. But not so much that it feels like the vocalist is shouting in the back of the stage to compensate for volume. I found using the included USB-C tends to lean dark, adding a little bit more bass oomph, not touching much on the rest of the sound, and it can depend on what you connect it to. I don't know why this seems to be the case, specifically with the DAC inside the included USB-C cable, because when I use DAC adapters like this, it doesn't seem to change the sound signature, if it does at all. That's even when I try larger DACs. The differences in how the included USB cable sounds seem to be exaggerated specifically by my Samsung devices, because connecting to my older phone, it only makes a slight change to the sound signature. What Samsung devices seem to do is add its own V-shaped sound on top of the already slight V-shape of the Chu II, exaggerating the bass and highs just a little further. It doesn't destroy the enjoyability of the sound, but it does bring it well within what most people in the audiophile sphere would consider an enjoyable sound signature. For audiophiles, it's just about borders on being lackluster, but it still lacks detail and there isn't a lot of soundstage. On aux, the Chu II seems to have a similar issue when more power is applied to the IEMs. It boosts its slightly V-shaped sound to mildly V-shaped. Before going into more detail, I guess I can say that regardless of what and how you plug in the Chu II, the sound signature would be different exaggerations of V-shape. Going into detail on how they sound, I'll be referring to them on the 3.5mm aux cable as I've explained how they would sound on USB-C already. The bass is present but a little sloppy with just about noticeable amount of oomph. While it does bleed into the mids and vocals, it doesn't cover them horribly enough to make the vocals feel too shouty. But it does dilute the perceived detail, even with higher pitched voices in the track Arcade Night from Aika and Hikaru Station. The mids and vocals sound less like they're fighting against the instruments to gain a spotlight, more like they were placed in the same level as where the instruments are instead of in front to make sure that they're heard properly amongst everything else. But when a vocalist is alone or without a crowd of instruments, it sounds a little soft with some detail peeking through, as I found in the track Villain by Anapansu, an English cover by Villain by Stella Jang. The treble isn't intrusive and there isn't any semblance that I was able to find, despite the treble seeming a little louder than the mids. There ironically seems to be a gap in the airiness of the treble, creating a small padded room feeling, which I noticed in the track named Villain, this time by MJ Apanay. I guess the name Antagonist wasn't easy to put into song, but you will be my protagonist if you're subscribed, assuming you are an enthusiast in tech and their ability both in entertainment and productivity. Even though my description on the Chu II doesn't sound flattering, the Chu IIs are better than most, if not all, earphones that you would get at a dollar store, or once upon a time, free with your phone. And it's still an earphone I would recommend because it doesn't sound horrible. It sounds good. The problem is me being an audio gear enthusiast, knowing that it's just short of great. For non-audiophiles, the Chu II would actually sound clearer and much more likely balanced given a lack of previous experience. And it doesn't feel like it's lacking the bass too much while maintaining a decent semblance of clarity or detail. But what if you are a gamer with a loud laptop and no headphone jack? Would the Chu IIs be a good alternative? Well, kind of, because they have a decent bit of separation, regardless of the lack of definition or resolution. I can mostly hear everything at the same time. Great for FPS games where it's mostly booming bass of explosions, sharp cracks of gunfire, and stomping of boots on the ground. An enclosed immersive experience. In terms of competitive shooters, there isn't any sound staging or directionality. It's just mostly left, or mostly right, or definitely close. Assuming that they aren't in front of you. Not the best, but if you want to feel like you're in the middle of the action, it's great. But if you rely on callouts in the middle of everything, vocals don't pull much attention, making me not recommend the Chu II for specifically games in a competitive nature, but an absolute win for single-player games. And if you're getting sucked into work, let's say a call center, the lack of detail and softening in the mids and vocals can be a godsend. And just like the audio coming from this mic, I don't exactly want to hear every detail of a person's voice when they're screaming at me for not filling out their RMA form that their company that they work for has to fill out for their billing purposes. Let's just say there are a lot of needlessly angry people out there. On the other hand, if you are doing audio editing or producing, you're going to have to keep in mind that there isn't much detail. Everything sounds closer than it actually is, and the general sound is a little too sloppy to accurately use for slight adjustments. If you're looking for an IM or earphone that does sound good in gaming and work, check out this video. Make sure to subscribe for more content on tech and their ability for both productivity and gaming. I'm your host, Naka. Have a nice one. Honestly, I don't like what audiophiles seem to be searching for in sound. I just find their opinions a decent referencing point.